Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Grung episode. We're talking today about the Trump 2.0 administration, the so-called Donroe Doctrine, and how it's leading to a new world disorder, its effects on America itself and regions far away like Latin America, Iran, the South Caucasus, and of course, as we talk about that, we'll talk about the visit to Armenia and Azerbaijan by Vice President JD Vance. For this, we are soon going to be joined by James W. Carden, a columnist and former advisor on Russian affairs to the U.S. State Department, and Dr. Pietro Shakarian, a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union and a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia.
And before our guests join us, I'm going to take the opportunity and say thank you again for watching and listening to our shows. We humbly accept that as your vote of confidence and your trust that we bring you truthful reporting and analysis of Armenian news and Armenian content. There is no corporate assets, of course, it goes without saying, no government shills, no political associations. We are not funded by any three-letter agency, just the two of us who think that this information belongs out there. So we're doing our best. And of course, if you'd like to become a sustaining member, that will help us get in front of more eyes. You can do that by going to podcast.grung.org/donate. Any amount of donation, whether recurring or one-time, is appreciated. All right, thanks for listening and on to the show.
James, Pietro, welcome back to the Grung podcast.
Thank you.
Azbed Hovik, it's great to be here. James, it's great to be with you again.
Welcome, everyone. We have a 4-person podcast once again, and it's not too many times that we do this, so it's great to have you guys on in any case. Let's begin by talking about this Donroe Doctrine and the Trump 2.0 presidency. We know that since taking office, he has pushed a hemisphere-first policy, or claims to have done so. He has also claimed to stop many wars, sometimes by threatening tariffs, and other times by just, calling people. But this doctrine is, people call it, or he calls it, the Donroe Doctrine. And I guess it's styled after the Monroe Doctrine, but with elements of transactionality and with a coercive edge. We can think about Greenland, we can think about renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, and so many other things that are quite controversial and in the news. Should we just stop worrying and embrace the penguins? What is the Donroe Doctrine? James, maybe we can begin with you. And what exactly is policy versus branding in all of this?
Well, it's all branding. I'll start with the second question first. The Donroe Doctrine is an attempt to lend, I think, strategic coherence to an incoherent policy. As you say, it's mainly marketing. Trump, my belief is that America First is mainly marketing. It was just used during the campaign. Basically, what we have is the inverse of Theodore Roosevelt's maxim to speak softly and carry a big stick. Donald Trump does the opposite of that, and we're seeing that play out all over the world. The Donroe Doctrine, in terms of the Western Hemisphere, differs from the Monroe Doctrine in that the Monroe Doctrine was basically a warning to the European great powers at the time not to meddle in the Caribbean basin. This, so far anyway, seems to be an attempt by the Trump administration to adopt the policy of Finlandization that the Soviet Union used against, obviously, Finland during the Cold War. So Finland was basically not allowed to pursue its own foreign policy aims, but as long as they did that, the Soviets promised to keep their mitts off of Finland. I think that's kind of the closest historical analogy we can get to the Donroe Doctrine, with the caveat that it also very much includes economic policies. and other countries' trade policies. But a lot of people fold trade policies into foreign policy anyway. So that's basically the best I can do explaining the unexplainable.
Yeah. Pietro, your thoughts, and also at the same time, maybe you can explain is maybe with all these moves or plays around Greenland and so forth, is Washington trying to build a moat as the world turns more multipolar and as some say it is the U.S. empire is retrenching. Is it trying to build a moat around it and carve off its sphere of influence, and with solid red lines? What are your thoughts?
I think it's marketed like that, right? Because this is exactly what James was saying. A lot of this is just marketing. Because I think really, unfortunately, the planning of this strategy is the idea is effectively that we should consolidate our position in North America first. And then after that, the idea is then we'll be strong enough to then go and confront China. So ultimately, the ultimate goal of confronting China is still there. I mean, there is kind of this kind of neocon undercurrent. It's not just that we're just focusing on the Western Hemisphere completely. It's that focusing on the Western Hemisphere and consolidating in the Western Hemisphere is seen as step one to a more confrontational policy toward the Chinese, actually, as a matter of fact. And also, I fully agree with James in the sense that this is not, we cannot compare this to Teddy Roosevelt's idea of speak softly and carry a big stick, because what we have is an extremely bombastic, attitude toward the world that Trump is pushing, an extremely bombastic policy. Even you can't even really call it a policy, like James says. You can't even make sense of it. I mean, it like baffles the mind,
Yeah.
and it also seems like it's just like a continuation of, in many respects, what we saw under Biden, except that was all kind of like, maybe, I guess you could say, disguised in this rhetoric of freedom and democracy and liberty and human rights and whatever. But there was a constant tendency toward, radical escalation. And that's actually what we're seeing now, accelerating even more so, actually under Trump, with regard to Iran, and also we saw with Venezuela, and then now Greenland. There's almost like a new crisis. It was the longest January I've ever been through in terms of news, because there was so much coming at you, and that's not even counting Minneapolis, what's happening domestically. So, yeah. I mean, that's just my two
Just
cents.
overload of news and information.
I do want to.
But
I do
yes.
want to. I want to agree with Pietro on the China angle. That's absolutely the case. Sources of mine who have met with Trump NSC members say that China was really the main driver of the policy in Venezuela. It was meant to send a message to China. And the other thing that I think distinguishes this emerging Donroe Doctrine is that it's looking like it's regime change on the cheap. In other words, they are going to aim to decapitate the people at the very top of the regime, but not really change the regime entirely, as was tried in Afghanistan and Iraq. Trump has learned enough to know that that was extremely damaging to the presidency of George W. Bush. So I think I know we'll get to this, the Iranians are quite concerned about now is just that very scenario, that it will be decapitation, not regime change in its entirety. So that's another aspect of the Donroe.
That's an interesting point when we're talking about China. Yesterday on our podcast, we had Andrei Tsigankov, a scholar of Russian foreign affairs and international relations. And we had an interesting question that we posed him, with all this coercive I don't even know if to call it diplomacy, coercive policies, coercive foreign policy that the U.S. is pursuing, that, as we seem to agree, is like masked under like this Donroe Doctrine label. What does this posture mean for countries like China and Russia and the U.S. relations with those countries. And, does this also mean that they might just take this as a cue that they will also implement similar policies? And I just want to remind you that I believe this is day number 2 when the New START treaty expired. So we have no nuclear treaty anymore between the United States and Russia. What are your thoughts about essentially major nuclear superpowers and how they would interpret these policies? And what do you see in the future for our relations, the U.S. relations with these powers?
Well, I do think that even though, let's say, maybe the Donroe Doctrine might not seem directly in the crosshairs of Russia and China, right? It's framed, it's marketed. This is just the Western Hemisphere, right? Well, first of all, even that's incorrect. Because, even though he talks a lot about Greenland and Venezuela, right? That he's still going full throttle in West Asia. He's still, look at what he's doing. He's sending, we're going to talk about it later in the show, I'm sure, but this Armada to the Persian Gulf. So it's not really completely focused on North America or the Western Hemisphere as they leave us to, as they lead us to believe. But in addition to that, I also believe that again, it's seen as a way to consolidate control over the Western Hemisphere in order to go off and confront China. And I guess I would presume Russia as well. Although, Russia, the Trump policy has been, at least the stated policy was, let's solve the Ukraine conflict so then we can go off and confront, the Chinese. But that's not going really anywhere. That's still, the diplomacy on that is rather scant, to put it mildly. It seems like as if, from what I can gather, that the Trump administration, after this expiration of the START treaty, has scrambled to try and keep it alive, right? It's almost like I would compare it to like one of my students, right? So I have a assignment, a paper that is due by a specific time, a specific day and a specific time. And then what happens is, the deadline comes and goes. Most of the students hand in the papers, but then, there are going to be like a few students who say, oh, look, there was some issue and I couldn't get it in on time and all this and that. Is there any way I can send it to you, Dr. Shakarian? And that's what I'm seeing here with START, that the deadline is passed, but just like a undergraduate student, they're begging for, the United States, the Trump administration is begging for an extension. They want an extended deadline. So now apparently they're negotiating to kind of, tamp down or to kind of like, kind of keep that under control. But the other thing I also want to mention really quick, kind of mentioning, going back on the Donroe Doctrine piece, is even though this is, I think this term Donroe Doctrine was even coined by the New York Post. And then Trump basically, took it and adopted it as his own. But the irony, of course, is it's not just the Don as in Donald. We can also read it as like Don, like a mafia Don, because that's how the foreign policy seems to be looking these days, unfortunately, from the Trump side.
I think in terms of New START, my reading of it is that the non-renewal of it was quite on purpose. They wanted it to expire because they have this delusion that they've talked themselves into, and this is a hangover from Trump 1, that China must be brought into it. And the Chinese have been pretty straightforward about this, that they have no interest in it. They have approximately 600 working nuclear warheads. The U.S. and Russia have were capped at 1,550 apiece, I believe, in terms of strategic warheads. But I think this again has to do with China. I think one of the things that, for all his talk and for all the social media craziness and all of the really stupid people that he's appointed to high positions, there's also a lot of continuity there. I remember reading Robert Gates' recollection at the beginning of the Obama term. So Gates was the Secretary of Defense under Bush, and Obama kept him on. And Gates said during the Obama transition that he thought that a lot of the Obama people were going to be surprised by just how much continuity there was going to be between W and Obama in terms of foreign policy. Similarly, that holds today. Trump has, for all his talk about solving, I think, 6 or 8 wars, I forget what the claim is. He's also bombed 7 countries, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, Yemen, Somalia, and Nigeria. And we've bombed or helped other countries bomb other countries 622 times. This is just year 1. So that's to a amount of continuity. I see a lot of continuity, despite the nonsense regarding the border peace. I see a lot of continuity with policy towards Israel. And there's a little bit of a break in terms of Russia policy, because at least the two sides are talking to one another. That's a big change from Biden.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they have just only, I think, within the last day or so, reinstituted military-to-military cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. So that's a good thing, but it's not nearly enough.
So far, we've been talking about some of the adversarial relationships between the U.S. and Russia and China, but I think that a lot of the friends and allies of the United States are also feeling this turbulence, because at Davos, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney argued that the rules-based order is no longer credible. At the same time, Trump is floating a parallel structure to the UN and with this board of peace, and it almost feels like a pay-to-play kind of a membership. So is Carney describing a real break or a reality that's been true for a long time or did not exist? I mean, people talk about the international community. People talk about a rule-based order. What was it? Did it exist? What's going on? James, your
Oh,
thoughts?
it was always a useful fiction, and it was just useful to the United States and its allies. So Carney said something out loud that had been true, since at least Kosovo. No, in the international system, as any good IR scholar knows, the is an anarchic system, and um, there is no ultimate power. So it's might makes right in the international system, and I think that very laudable efforts to address that in the aftermath of the Second World War held up occasionally and were useful during the Cold War. Um, Certainly, the UN Security Council played a useful role in de-escalating some of the more perilous moments. But after the Cold War ended and Russia went through its decade of weakness, the U.S. Basically made it very clear that it had no use really for the UN Security Council, and that's where we are. So I always laughed when I would hear people like Biden and Obama and their minions talk about the glories of the rules-based international order. There hasn't been any such thing, and it was really their side that destroyed it. Carney is. I cannot argue with what Carney said.
Pietro, I'm sure as a very well-read person, I'm sure that you haven't missed the parallels between the Board of Peace and the Orwellian terminology that's being used here. Is this is this like a privatized United Nations that Trump is starting? And with the $1 billion that he's imposing on members if they stay over 3 years, is this a pay for play, or is this a situation where he is trying to keep people out for the balance of his term? Because we're not sure if this is going to actually outlast Trump himself.
I think it seems like to me, to be honest with you, it looks like a scam. This is, because if you're, basically, he's trying to create his own UN, and basically he's coaxing these countries to join. And membership, if you want to be a full-time member, is $1 billion, right? A cool $1 billion. And I don't know who in their right mind would want to join such an organization.
Armenia is not going to pay $1 billion.
Yeah,
not
you
that
never know, but
I don't think anybody's asked for it. But
you remember, by the way, that there was recently a report out from Gutierrez of the UN saying the UN is in major financial trouble because there you have massive unpaid dues of certain members that are racking up. Imagine what would happen with the Board of Peace. If the membership is $1 billion, that's pretty bad, But I think it's a bid for Trump. It seems like he's trying, first of all, to kind of replace the UN. And again, what did he say his attitude toward international law was, right? He said, the only thing stopping me is my own morality. And that really, anything goes, right? It's almost like going back to the old Cole Porter song, anything goes, right? That this is what we're seeing right now with Trump, that anything goes with him, right? And so he wants to basically kind of create his own UN that he's running that basically sanctions what he wants, right? That nobody would oppose, his will. But there's also another interesting thing when we talk about the Board of Peace, Osbed. What was this created initially for? What was the initial idea of the Board of Peace? What was it all about?
I think it was to deal with the Gaza situation. Right.
Absolutely.
But then it suddenly was expanded. The scope was expanded that we'll have a Board of Peace for every region. We'll have one for Armenia and Azerbaijan. We'll have one for Venezuela.
What was so
suddenly
crazy
turned into a UN essentially.
I know, and it was almost like talk about improv. He goes from one thing to another thing to another thing, and I don't even know what's going on. And even with Gaza, though, what's incredible to me is from what I can see, what has been advanced by this so-called Board of Peace sounds incredibly colonial, incredibly exploitative. To run Gaza without any say of the Palestinians, that Trump himself would be doing it, or that his Board of Peace would be doing it. It's just terrible. And what can you say about it? I think, like I said, I think it's a scam. I think it's a scam. It's not going to last.
The plan was originally to turn Gaza into some kind of version of South Beach, and
absolutely,
build up a bunch of condos. And I think that the new members of the Board of Peace are going to be surprised that really their task is to look after the condos. That's it. This is Kushner's pursuing all sorts of plans like this. In Albania, for instance, he's trying to turn the coast of Albania into another South Beach. With regard to what you were saying before about foreign policy and replacing the UN to the highest bidder, the fact of the matter is that U.S. foreign policy has always been for sale, at least since the end of the Cold War. There's no bigger example of that than Israel's influence in the United States. The Congress is bought and paid for. Azerbaijan has a lot of these think tanks in Washington bought and paid for. William Browder, basically bought off Congress and privatized U.S. foreign policy. Because he didn't want to be sent back to Russia to face very justified tax evasion charges.
Also Saudi
Arabia. It goes on.
Absolutely.
That isn't necessarily anything new. Trump seems to be internationalizing the problem.
Yeah. James, as a consequence of some of these things that we're saying, can you also tell us why larger powers like China, Russia, France, UK, Germany haven't joined, and yet you've had these Armenias and these Azerbaijans and the Saudi Arabias join? Is for the small countries, is this a hedge, a trap, or some kind of a combination of both? Why would Armenia join?
It's a
and
trap.
Also, I just want to mention no EU member except Hungary has joined, and most of them are autocracies.
It's a way to buy into the good graces of the emperor. And
Absolutely.
that makes sense for a small country to try to do that. The big players don't have to do it. China doesn't have to do it. Why would anyone get involved in that problem? And I've always thought, and have written before, that one of the smartest things the United States could do in terms of the Israel-Palestine problem would be to turn it over to Russia. And there are a lot of good reasons to do it. One of the reasons would be because for years, Russia wanted to be taken, very seriously as an arbiter of peace, and to be seen as one of the two big players on the international stage. And that would have given them a chance to do it, or to try to do it, and it would have given us a chance to get the hell away from it. But as usual, nobody listened. But that's where we are today.
Yeah. And also the other thing, I mean, really, these countries, these small countries, I mean, if they pay $1 billion, if they fork over $1 billion, it's like they're getting trumped at the end of the day. I mean, I don't see, I mean, it's like a scam to me.
It's a Trump thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's move to Iran. So we are, I think, at a phase in the negotiations where the negotiators, including the foreign minister of Iran, Araghchi, have flown back to Iran. Is being painted as an opportunity to regroup and continue, but also some see it as a sign that negotiations are not going well. Trump appears to be signaling, maximum coercion, and Israel and U.S. hawks are cheering on for a military strike, a massive military strike. Meanwhile, we see some response from Russia and China. We see coordinate, exercises and some signaling that, we see Chinese ships in the region. But I wanted to ask, Pietro, we can start with you. What you believe is the most likely U.S. strategy here? Is it like everywhere else, like coercive diplomacy? Do you think maybe just to save face, Trump will do some limited strikes and fly away, or are they going to go all in for regime change, or maybe just a bluff? I'm not sure.
It's very difficult to say, Hovik. I mean, to be quite honest with you, what I do why I can't tell you is back in January when it looked as if we were on the precipice of a major war with Iran, right? That it seemed to me as if that Trump was persuaded to move back from the edge by Turkey, Egypt, the Gulf countries, the Arab states in the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, to kind of move away from that prospect of war, because they understood in the Middle East that if Iran, because the idea, Tovik, it's not just about regime change. The idea, like I said, is about regime removal. So the idea is remove the regime, but then maybe the objective would be something like a Syrian scenario, where Iran fragments and kind of balkanizes into many kind of smaller kind of ethno-states, that kind of a thing. We have the Azeris in the north, or let's say the Kurds in the northwest, or I don't know, Khuzestan and also Baluchistan, all these different regions that they might just like kind of split away de facto from Iran to kind of turn Iran to a gigantic Syria or Somalia right there in the core of Eurasia. And I don't know if that idea is off the agenda, because it seems like as if that Trump is back for more. I mean, to do this kind of Armada confrontation, I mean, it's to me, it's something that I think would put you a step closer to war. It's also I don't think, by the way, the United States will succeed in this plan. I mean, I know Trump seems to be kind of moving in that direction. He's talking about negotiation, but if I were Iran, I would not trust the United States at this point, and I certainly wouldn't trust this administration, especially after the June war, the so-called 12-day war. But also, I think that even though Trump, he's under immense pressure by Israel, Netanyahu personally, and also the neocons in Washington D.C. Everybody from certainly Lindsey Graham to Philip Breedlove, the former NATO commander, they're all saying that we want you to go in locked and loaded and really destroy the country. And I don't think it's going to end as well as the United States and Mr. Trump believe it will. I think it's going to be a catastrophe. We also have to think in the history, very seldom has Iran as a country been fully conquered by anybody. There were a few exceptions in the history, like Alexander the Great, like the Arabs, like the Mongols, like Tamerlane, right? We can go on and look at that. But in general, I don't think the United States has the capacity to take out Iran or certainly invade Iran, a country of this size. I mean, we talk about the area all the time. Like I said, it's about the size of Mongolia, and it by area, and in terms of population, it's over 90 million people. So I don't think I don't see the wisdom in this.
James, I want to ask you, what deterrence factors or escalation tripwires does Iran have, including maybe cutting off shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, missiles and so forth? And also, at the same time, do you think that Russia and China can eventually be coerced, or essentially they will allow Iran to be dismembered, like, I think the plan is right now?
I don't think it'll get to the point of dismemberment. I'm not really sure what options the Russians have right now anyway, being tied up in Ukraine. I think the Iran situation is going to be a test case in the United States of two things. The first test case will be whether it will be a test case of the strength of the Israel lobby. It'll also be a test case of Donald Trump's control over his own government. It's very clear from the reliable reporting in Washington, that Trump does not want, in fact, to pursue a policy of war and regime change against Iran. Again, one of the things that he's learned, maybe one of the only things that he's ever learned, was that Iraq was a disaster for the presidency of George W. Bush. However, such is the pressure on Trump to act that within an hour of the end of the negotiations today, the State Department announced more sanctions on Iran within an hour. And this was after the Iranians came out of the meeting and said it was a good meeting, and that they were encouraged, and that they're going to do it again. And we should keep in mind, I think Pietro mentioned this, last June, we were in the middle of talks when the Israelis scuttled it by attacking Iran. So unfortunately, even though the talks seem to be somewhat productive and it going in a positive direction, it doesn't mean anything, because we heard the same thing last June.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, how could they trust Trump after this too?
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
What would the deal look like anyway? And let's say they cut a deal that that's not immediately abrogated by Trump. It seems to me that a complete disarmament is being demanded of Iran, which it's never going to agree to. So it's essentially backed into a corner for a war, a second war.
Well, one of the frustrating things about this is that, there's no recognition on the part of the Trump people that we're in this very situation because of their own actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was no reason to pull out of the JCPOA. There was no reason at all, but they were the ones who did it. So again, but I think you're right. Your point is well taken. What does a reasonable deal look like?
Yeah.
I mean, the Iranians can never accept a lot of the preconditions that Washington is demanding, and for our part, we can't overthrow that regime, and we have all these sitting targets now in the Persian Gulf and in all these bases that we have in the region. So, like everything else with this administration, it's it makes zero sense.
Yeah, and I also want to say something else too. I think that if Russia and China, if there was ever even the remotest possibility that Iran would be in. I don't think. I wanted to say this right now. I mean, I don't think Iran is in super dire straits where the country is on the verge of fragmenting or something like that. But if it ever came to that point, the Russians and the Chinese would would put a stop to it. They would put a stop to the U.S. trying to really balkanize the country or to really destroy the country because it's such a significant node. Like I said, in the whole BRICS framework, in the whole Eurasian framework, in the whole idea of the One Belt, One Road, they're not going to stand for that. And we're already seeing, again, even though, I mean, they don't announce it very loudly, the Russians and the Chinese are finding ways to kind of help Iran out, to kind of support Iran militarily, right? Kind of, quietly. Also, you saw these recent, I mean, we're going to see really these exercises coming up at the end of the month in the northern Indian Ocean, with involving the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. So I mean, I don't see China and Russia just laying over and allowing the U.S. to do this. I think that it's going to be a big fight.
I'm not sure if this is correct, but one of the things that I was reading is that one of the demands from the United States at these negotiations is trade with China. Even Iran's trade with China appears to be in the crosshairs for the United States, which I see as completely designed, maybe essentially like to fail if it's correct. I don't know if any of you gentlemen are aware of these preconditions and whether this is correct or not.
Well, that does read like a poison pill, but it's also in keeping with the administration's policy all along. The administration, its rhetoric with regard to the protests is so disingenuous. The protesters take to the streets. The administration says, well, look at how terrible things are. Look at how terrible their economy is. Well, the reason that their economy is so terrible is because they've been slapped with all these American-led sanctions for all of these years. We're the ones causing the unrest.
Right.
And even in the most recent wave of the unrest, I mean, that we've just seen, actually, the U.S. was the one that actually basically pushed this kind of high inflation that we saw in Iran. This kind of recent economic crisis that led to the Bazaris going out and protesting, that led to the initial kind of, I guess you could say, bottom-up element of the protest movement. But now, and also, like I said, the other thing, as I mentioned in the last podcast, the incredible coordination of the media on this whole issue of Iran, like to kind of ready up the media, ready up the country, ready up the United States and the Western world for, a new Iraq, effectively. Although, again, as we know, like Iran is a much larger country, and the outcomes of such a intervention would be catastrophic. Even though you have some pro-Shah people in Los Angeles, as bet you probably are familiar with this, who are saying things like, please, Mr. Trump, please, Mr. President, come bomb our country, come bomb Iran. In truth, it's not going to lead to anything good. It certainly would not lead to anything good for Iranians. And even if we take the scenario that Reza Pahlavi would come to power in Iran, it would not lead to anything good either. It would not lead to certainly any kind of, I guess you could say, democracy.
Right. I think we have talked in the past that the Iranian diaspora here, at least in Los Angeles, is a relatively pro-Shah environment because they all came here after the overthrow, the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. So there's that.
Can I ask you a question? Does it bother them at all that Pahlavi is clearly in the pocket of Mossad?
Well, I think, James, some things are advertised well and other things are not advertised well. I mean, how many people have read that Pahlavi was in Israel making pro-Israeli statements? Almost nobody knows that, but they all know that the Iranians are in the streets and making pro-Shah demonstrations as if they want this guy to be. I mean, who is this guy? We're in America, where we overthrew England so that we can be a democracy. We are promoting shahs and monarchs and stuff like just completely berserk.
Yeah,
it doesn't
absolutely.
make any sense to me.
That's not even counting what happened in '53, where the U.S. together with the British, I mean, that we overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh, in the democratically elected prime minister of Iran. And that's the starting point for how we got here, even.
Yeah, but as a final point on that section, Hovig, I want to agree with you because it seems to me that the negotiations are meant to fail because every time Iran takes up to negotiating something that wasn't discussed before, and I'll give you an example, when they were discussing nuclear disarmament or nuclear program end with Israel, the next thing was we want you to get rid of the missiles. And then when they started opening possibilities of reducing missiles, and now we want you to not trade with China. I mean, there's no end to these things, and it's designed so that at some point Iran says, we're not talking anymore, and we will be able to point at them and say, well, look at them. They stopped the negotiations. They're responsible for the failure. I think that's the game. But can I move to a little bit more of the U.S. domestic situation? Because here at home, politics are also looking more coercive and less consensual, with stress around immigration enforcement, federal to state friction, and institutional. We have written institutional trust, but actually it's institutional distrust that's growing. Uh, and abroad, the US is taking all these sharper positions that we talked about. So is this domestic turbulence connected to the relative decline and of hegemony dynamics that have prevailed in the world since the fall of the Soviet Union, or is it mostly Trump-centric, James?
Oh, I have to view it as more Trump-centric. I
Hmm.
don't, I think in the absence of this ICE enforcement policy, I don't think that we'd be seeing it. Americans aren't really the sort to take to the streets over egg prices. It really, I think, has everything to do um, with ICE and the irresponsible nature of
Let's just say racism. I mean,
well,
no matter where you're.
that's a driving, that's a driving factor. Um, However, people who spent professional law enforcement officers that I've spoken to who spent their lives doing it are astounded by the um, amateur hour nature of these people who are donning these masks and beating, arresting 5-year-olds and pepper spraying old ladies are otherwise unemployable. So, these are kind of, the loser stormtroopers of the MAGA movement who have been given, federal authority. So, it's not a good situation. I think in the absence of that, I think if Trump actually had staffed his administration with competent people instead of bottom feeders like Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski, and Tom Homan, we wouldn't be seeing this.
And I think it's just completely, I think, out of control, the situation. I mean, we see Minneapolis, not just, Ms. Good being shot, but then you see Mr. Preddy being shot, murdered in both cases. The tension there is so high that you would think that the idea would be we need to kind of cool things down, right? I have not seen any kind of like statesmanly action that would indicate from this administration that they are signaling an effort to cool down that very, very hot domestic situation there in Minneapolis, right? Ironically, of course, the weather is very cold in Minneapolis, but the situation is extraordinarily flammable.
Yeah.
And as we can see already, with two people being shot within just a few weeks of each other, within 1 month, really, we're talking about. It's just like, I think it's just astounding. And also, like, they're going into Minneapolis as if this is like a counterinsurgency operation. They're treating, yeah. And also the other great irony, of course, is now when they talk about, well, with the shooting, with the murder of Mr. Preddy, they say, well, look, you know what? He was carrying a gun and he shouldn't have been doing that in a protest. And that's so ironic because all this time they were talking about, if talking about the conservatives, the Republicans were always talking about, the importance of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms and all that. Well, here you have somebody who is bearing an arm and look at
Yeah.
the situation. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Pietro, you mentioned that you're not seeing any kind of statesman-like efforts from the White House to calm the situation down and lower the temperature here. My feed today is full of some kind of a posting that Trump has made that was deemed full-on racist for about the Obamas. I have not seen it. All I know is that the White House actually took it down, which is amazing. The White House took down something that Trump posted. I didn't see it, but both Democrats and Republicans are slamming it, and that's what I'm seeing in my feed. So I can't say. So you were absolutely right. But as a historian, what have you noticed about situations like this? Do great powers destabilize at home when they are trying to retrench in their foreign policies abroad? If they're seeing some kind of a new multipolarity, if they're seeing maybe adversaries that are rising to the occasion on the global scene, what happens to them domestically?
Well, I think that shifts in the international system can have domestic, ripple effects, as we've seen throughout history. But I think that in this case, what we're seeing is increasing domestic crisis. And there was obviously no plan B for if the US would ever reach a point like this. So there was this assumption adopted in the 90s that we're in the unipolar moment and everything is so good that we don't even need to, continuously maybe, do reforms. And even in fact, we can take out some of those reforms that were implemented to kind of make for a fair, a more level playing field in American politics, like when we talk about the Glass-Steagall Act, that was repealed. So in some ways, I think definitely I concur with James that a lot of what we're seeing is Trump specific. But I think really what we're seeing is a crisis within the system that is being made worse by the erratic nature of Trump and the people around him. I think that the US, I mean, both in foreign policy and in domestic policy, is right now it's in a crisis. I mean, we can even look at the economy. It doesn't look, so great. Even though Trump is always consulting the stock market, he's hoping, they even had this. I mean, he was even interviewed recently, and he was saying, you know what, I'm thinking that, now that I'm looking pretty good on the economy, and the interviewer was saying, well, I'm not, seeing it myself. What gives you such confidence? And he's like, well, we're about to turn the corner, that kind of a thing. But I think when it comes down to it, Trump, I think that he's making already this moment of crisis much worse. Because as we can see, even before Trump, when it was Biden, there already were profound domestic crises in the United States and profound crises internationally that went back to the United States. So I think what's happening with Trump is that it's just gotten much worse because of the approach and the character of this administration. So that's how I read it, actually, as a matter of fact. I think that the US really needs to do some fundamental reforms. They really need to sit, and I've been saying this for years. I've been saying this for many years. I actually thought in 2008, when Obama came in, I thought this was going to be the great moment where America has its Gorbachev, America has its glasnost or perestroika moment, that there's now going to be fundamental reforms in the system that's going to, really make America great again. And in truth, that never happened. The banks were bailed out, right? Wall Street was let off the hook. And we still were getting involved in our forever wars. And the situation just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And now we're at a crisis point. So that's how I see it. I think that I think that part of this is Trump, certainly, without a doubt. But I think a lot of it, there's also an element of it that was building up slowly over the years.
Well, I mean, despite all this polarization that we're seeing in the United States, I'm just wondering if there is a change in power. How much of Trump's internal policies will persist, regardless of who comes after him? Or do you believe that it will snap back? And I guess that's a big if, because, yeah, that's a big assumption that things will change, power will change, because I believe, Trump wants to somehow stay beyond his second term. So I think Alan Dershowitz of Jeffrey Epstein fame is writing a book on how Trump can stay a third term. So let's say, if Trump leaves, do you see any of these policies changing, or um, any um, any of this polarization internally in the United States reducing?
Well, it depends on who replaces him. If it's Vance or Rubio, probably not. I think it goes beyond the personalities at the top. What we're experiencing is a systemic crisis. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the unrest that we're seeing now is taking place in Minneapolis because it was the site of the spark that set off the unrest 6 years ago. Uh,
Mm.
and I think we're going to be fighting the battles of 2020 for a very long time. And it would take an extraordinary American leader to recognize that and then address the underlying systemic problems. And there is no such leader on the horizon in any party, in either party.
Mm.
Yeah. And also, I can say
Okay.
this, even though we talk about polarization in the society, I think that actually I'm seeing more and more and more Americans, across party lines, expressing discontent with what they're seeing. There's a lot of disillusionment with Trump among Republicans, actually, as a matter of fact. And people, what this administration has done is it's actually brought more people together over their common dislike of the current government in the United States, over the administration.
Yeah.
But that being said, just like what James was saying, at this moment, we would need a great statesman or a stateswoman. We need somebody to sweep in and really kind of, reform the system, to recognize the profound problems we have, and to really kind of, pull the show together. But I'm also not seeing that right now at this moment, unfortunately. But that's what
Yeah.
America needs. That's really what America needs. I mean, if they don't, even if not now, in the future, certainly they will definitely need it. I think that what
Okay.
would force something like that, I just want to finish with this. I think what would force ultimately something like that would be some sort of an economic crisis in the US. That's how I see it, because there's too many of these, like, because the other thing that a new kind of leader of that caliber would have to address would be the influence of the big money on the politics, as we see with Israel, or, the energy lobbies, or the military industrial complex. That would all need to be reined in. That would all need to be confronted. You would need a particularly strong leader to stand up to all those lobbies, to rein them in. And right now, I'm not seeing that.
The irony is that there's fertile ground on both the left and the right for such a leader. There's actually a fair amount of overlap with regard to Americans' disenchantment with the free market system. I think I fear Pietro's right, as he so often is, that it's going to take a real crisis. The last time the United States elected an extraordinary person to the office of president was in 1932, during the Great Depression.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come to the last topic of our discussion today. Um, as we learned recently, I mean, we knew that JD Vance was coming to the Caucasus, but it seems like the date has been set. He'll be here February 9th on Monday. We're recording this Friday. And he will visit Armenia and Azerbaijan in that order. I want to just paint the scene a little bit because, being self-proclaimed as a advocating for Christianity. He was seen lecturing the Europeans about, their lack of respect for Christian values and Christianity in general. He is visiting a country where the entire it seems like church is either like all the the church is under persecution. We have multiple archbishops in jail. We have many others basically under some kind of criminal charges with their travel rights blocked, banned. And after Armenia, he'll visit another country, Azerbaijan, where we have 19 hostages, literally hostages, who just yesterday received either like 20-year sentences or life sentences for just exercising self-determination, for securing the rights of Artsakh Armenians for 30 years, unfortunately, ending in 2023. So many believe that this trip will be a test of U.S. regional intent, especially around corridors. There's this Trump deal that we learned about, energy, and even some security plays. But at the same time, I wonder if some of those things about Christianity will somehow be expressed, given JD Vance's positions that he expressed previously. So I want to ask maybe James, starting with you, what is the U.S. objective in sending Vance now? Is it optics? Is it leverage over the trip deal? What could you say?
I think it's partially, well, as with everything in this administration, it's optics, but I think it's entirely regrettable because the trip will lend a aura of American, what would you say, America's endorsement of both the Armenian regime and the Azerbaijan regime. And that's not to my liking at all. I think Vance's trip will be worthless or worse if he does not condemn Pashinyan's attacks on the Armenian Apostolic Church and the imprisoning of their bishops. That's something that isn't on the radar of most Americans. It should be. With regard to Azerbaijan, again, that's Israel's best friend in the region, and which they use as a launching pad for intelligence operations against Iran. So, I worry about the timing because it's possible that Vance is making a trip to Azerbaijan to line their ducks up in advance of an attack on Iran. So I don't care for the trip at all, and I will be surprised if he does speak out against Pashinyan's abuses, but we'll have to see.
Mm-hmm. And Pietro, your thoughts on also how would Moscow and Tehran interpret this trip? What counters might they use to counteract this?
Well, I think that Moscow and Tehran would not, I mean, they would not look at this very favorably at all, because this is not a situation where, I mean, the context is so important to something like this. And it does not seem to me as if, I mean, so right now we're not in a situation where Armenia is, it's in a secure situation, or, the sovereignty is particularly strong there with Pashinyan and what he's doing with the trip agreements and what he's doing really, I mean, kind of at the behest of Turkey and Azerbaijan in terms of his policies, but also again the whole context of these recent kind of war threats against Iran, and also the recent unrest in Iran, that this cannot be looked at in a positive way from either the Russian point of view or the Iranian point of view. It will be looked at as incredibly provocative in the current context. So that's number one. Number two, again, there's this business of the whole trip corridor. The trip corridor, if realized, would not, be beneficial at all for the interests of Russia and Iran. Russia at first was much more cautious about the whole trip idea, but in the past 2 months, actually, they've been becoming more and more vocal about their opposition to it. So I don't necessarily, kind of see this being received very well in terms of what they'll do. Well, we will see. But They are both very patient countries. And if if both Armenia and Azerbaijan, or particularly Azerbaijan, were used as a launching pad against Iran in a new war, or if Aliyev were to kind of try and get involved directly in Iran's internal affairs, there would be a very strong reaction from that. There would be a very strong reaction to that, excuse me, from both Russia and Iran. So that's kind of where I see it going. Also, there's the matter of what's happening in June. So the whole regional dynamic actually could completely shift if Pashinyan was ousted from power. And right now, what we're seeing is Pashinyan's position politically in Armenia with the Poles is not doing so well. Now, it could very well be that he will hack the or that he will, I guess, rig the election to try and stay in indefinitely in power. You know, he could even try and cancel, like Trump. He could take, you know, a page from what Trump has floated in the U.S. when Trump said, "I think I might cancel the midterms." Maybe Pashinyan might say, "I might cancel the June election because I'm so afraid of what might happen." So,
well, his team has certainly given him the tools to do that by giving him the power to declare a state of emergency and not recognize the results of an election. So I definitely do agree there's a grounds for that.
But if there was a situation where there was a change of power in Armenia and you had a new government coming in that actually represented the interests of the Armenian people, especially in the security sphere, that would really shake up dramatically the whole regional dynamic in favor of Moscow and Tehran. And so suddenly that would be a big check, actually, by the way, on Azerbaijan and also on, by extension, Israel, which seeks to use Azerbaijan, as James was saying, as a launching platform into Iran. So that would be a huge shakeup if we're talking about potential developments going forward. But Iran and Russia, they're both chess players. They're both incredibly cautious countries. But they will not look at this Vance visit as being positive in any way. And like I said, again, context is everything, especially now what we've been seeing with, like I said, Trump sending this massive armada to the Persian Gulf, seeing these, these recent, riots in Iran where people were killed, just everything that doesn't lend itself to a very positive impression of this visit. That in the midst of all this, in the midst of all this unrest that the U.S. has been kind of stoking with Iran and all this tension and this pressure that they've been putting on Iran, that you send the U.S. vice president right there on Iran's borders, right, to two countries adjoining Iran, where he's going to discuss a deal on how to weaken Iran's position on its northern frontier by basically putting a U.S. company there to govern the southern portion of Armenia's Sunni province. So it doesn't look very good from their point of view. And also, again, we have to go back to the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty of Russia and Iran that was inked over a year ago now, where basically the whole idea was that that both Russia and Iran declared in that treaty that we will not allow external forces, external parties to get involved in our region and create instability in our region. So there's by even treaty, they're legally bound, I should say, to respond to something like this.
Pietro, one final comment. I believe that James said that this visit essentially legitimizes the two administrations in Azerbaijan and Armenia, none of which are particularly favorable to the regional dynamics.
They are not with the regional dynamic, either Armenia or Azerbaijan. And what this is also going to be seen as, it's not only going to be seen as a very provocative visit in and of itself of the U.S. Vice President just, swooping in and paying a visit to Aliyev and Pashinyan, but also it's going to be seen as an effort to bolster both governments. It would be perceived as an effort to legitimize him. And not only that, also, I mean, what worries me is, could it be a situation that Vance, again, who's somebody who is, conservative American Christian, could he try and maybe make some statement that would pour cold water on the persecution of the Armenian church? That would say, well, it's actually, the situation here is not so bad, right? I mean, pull a kind of a I guess you could say, kind of a Walter Duranty on us, and basically say that, well, you know what, really everything here is nice and hunky dory, and there's no persecution of any Christians here, and everything is fine, and that's another kind of element of this that would concern me, and it would be, I think that I would hope that that wouldn't be the case. I would hope that he's going there with good intentions, but even the fact that he's going there at this moment, at this time, in the middle of a crisis between the US and Iran, to show up on the northern border of Iran, I don't think that's the wisest move. But again, this administration has not been doing the wisest moves. I mean, look at how they're handling Minneapolis. Look at how they're handling Look how they're handling the United States.
I have every expectation that Vance is willing and prepared to sacrifice those jailed bishops on the altar of the Trump corridor. I have no question about that. JD Vance is about as unscrupulous a political figure in the United States as can be imagined.
Yeah, I concur with you. And just to confirm, I think that when you were saying legitimize him, you meant Pashinyan there, Pietro.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I think that, yeah, legitimizing Pashinyan. That's my main point. Yeah.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. This was a very interesting conversation, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us, Pietro and James.
Thank
you. Azbed Hovik, thank you, James. It's wonderful to see you again, and hopefully in better circumstances, hopefully things will somehow turn around, right? That's the one thing that gives me hope as a historian, that things constantly change in history, and eventually, hopefully, well, maybe things will change for the better. Who knows?
That's right. Okay, that was our show. This episode was recorded on February 6, 2026. We've been talking with James W. Carden, a columnist and former advisor to the U.S.-Russia Bilateral Presidential Commission at the U.S. State Department. His articles have appeared in a wide variety of publications, including The Nation, The American Conservative, Responsible Statecraft, and The National Interest, The Los Angeles Times, and more. He currently maintains the Realist Review on Substack.
And our other guest today was Dr. Pietro A. Shakarian, a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union, and a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. He was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Historical Research at the National Research University Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg, Russia. He is the author of the book Anastas Mikoyan, an Armenian reformer in Khrushchev's Kremlin. And for more information about the participants in this episode, you can check out our show notes at podcasts.grung.org/episode number. I'm Hovik Manouchian from Occupied Yerevan.
And I'm Azbed Bedrosian in Los Angeles. Don't forget to share our shows, like them, and comment on them. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day.